Okay, so we're going to continue to try to learn Midrash as a source of not only, we're not only going to look at Midrash critically, but we are also going to look at it as a possible source of inspiration. The two things which are often understood as opposed are not. I mean, Maimonides understands that, or for certain classes of people, it will be through intellect that one connects with the sacred. Here is a Midrash on Parshat Bereshit, on Genesis. It recounts a story of Ben Zoma. You have, I think, encountered Ben Zoma in Pirkei Avot, perhaps, or in the Haggadah. So this is an interesting scene. It once happened that Rav Shimon Ben Zoma was sitting and meditating. He's in reverie, oblivious to his surroundings. Rav Yeshua passes by and asks him, "How you doing?" Once, twice, and gets no answer. On the third time, he asks a little bit more forcefully, and suddenly Ben Zoma responds. So Rav Yeshua says to him, an interesting way of putting it, "Where are the footsteps of your mind coming from? Mi'an haraglaim, from where are your feet?" He's like asking him, are your feet on the ground? I mean, and if they are, tell me how. And Ben Zoma said, I was thinking, I was contemplating. I guess he's saying, I'm contemplating and, kind of leave me alone. Rabbi Yeshua said to him, and here's you can get the implicit leave me alone, I call heaven and earth to bear witness for me that I will not move from here until you tell me where the footsteps of your mind are coming from. Rabbi Yeshua's question is posed in an interesting way. I call heaven and earth as two distinct bodies to bear witness for me that I will not budge. I will not move physically from this spot until you tell me where the footsteps of your mind are coming from. So far in this story, we see this realm of contemplation, which is, and that's where Ben Zoma is located. And Rabbi Yeshua keeps on asking him, where are your feet? And says, I am not moving from this place, again, emphasizing the physical. And Ben Zoma finally gives in and says, I was thinking about the account of creation and the separation between the upper and lower waters. The separation of the upper and lower waters, which may seem completely arcane to us, is really the rabbis or the Torah considering what is the relationship between a non-spiritual physical world and a sacred realm. Right? How were these two things related? This question would obsess philosophers of the 17th century. In Chagiga, there are different answers given to this question, some of them are quite beautiful, like one hand above another, interlocked hands, various different, or not, I mean, different versions of touching, but not touching. And the touching, but not touching is very important because the touching part is we want to feel that unity. Whenever the rabbis are talking about metaphysics, they're also talking about ethics to some extent. We want to feel that unity in our soul or we want to see our physical life as in some sense sacred. The neshama is not the abandonment of the material, it is the sacred emanating from the material. So that's the good part, right? The touching. The not touching has to be preserved because, well, the world is based upon dualisms. We know this experientially. And I'm not saying metaphysically, we know this experientially because very often we sense the long gap, the wide gap between the sacred and the world as we see it. So Ben Zoma is sitting and contemplating this. He says, I discovered it. There are 2 or 3 hand breadths between heaven and earth, but that close. And then he brings a metaphor, and this is really what makes the other rabbi say he's gone, which is what they say at the end. He quotes a verse that it says in the second verse in Genesis, it doesn't not say that God blew his ruach over the water, but rather mirachefet, right? Am I getting that right? Mirachefet, yeah, I got it right. So it's hovering. And Ben Zoma uses a very interesting metaphor, like a dove that flaps its wings over its brood, where its wings touch and yet do not touch, as my brilliant colleague Daniel Feldman mentioned to me recently, like 5 minutes ago. This is a kind of a model for parenting. Being close, but not too close, right? You can't smother your students. So the hardest thing about teaching or parenting is the simultaneous distance that you must give, and also the closeness and when to do it and when not to do it, and usually getting it, well, 35 or 40% wrong, and that's good, right? Anyway, so from this metaphor, Rabbi Yeshua says he's gone. What that exactly means, the next part of the Gemara says Ben Zoma actually died soon after. But why was he gone? Daniel was also saying to me that Ben Zoma, like all of the rabbis, was devoted to bringing the sacred into the world. And perhaps he felt, because he saw the possibility of the closeness, he felt that disparity so acutely that he really couldn't go on. Or he lived in a world at a certain point, his feet are not on the ground anymore, and he's really kind of elevating, and one of the commentators says he's kind of floating away, floating into the air. He's lost his ground. I mean, both parts of that emphasize, well, in one, Ben Zoma can't be of this world because this world is so maybe corrupt or unable to accommodate him. Or maybe he sees that, and maybe this is like that almost like a divine point of view where the opposites that you thought were opposites are not, and that's the insight that he has, and that insight, well, he just gets taken up into that. And also, that's not a human insight, it's a divine one, right? Or alternatively, as I think Daniel's reading suggests, we feel often this horrible disparity between what we know the potential is and what we see as the reality. And Ben Zoma is the model of a person who is trying very hard to bring the sacred into the world. He has a consciousness of the sacred and the sense of the failure of the human to accommodate the sacred. Maybe his own perception in failing as a teacher, I don't know. Maybe that just is too much for him. And that image of touching and not touching. So for Ben Zoma, it's obviously tragic, but for us as a reference point, it also kind of explains discomfort and uncertainty and struggle, because there are those of us, we know what touching and not touching is, and touching gives us that sense of possibility. And living in a world of not touching, it frustrates our idealism. And it's important to keep the music playing up, right? And not that it goes down. And that's, I guess, also part of the metaphor, that we fall into this not touching and lose a sense of who we might be. Complicated and beautiful Midrash.